I've been in the spiritual zone, in the supernatural, surrounded by angels.
Gary Busey's life has always been full of twists, but nothing compares to the day he died for 2 hours and came back with a message he says was given to him by Christ himself.
Wait. It was a beautiful experience of understanding something that I wouldn't have understood without having the accident.
His experience on the other side is unlike anything you've heard before, and what he brought back might just change how you see life, death, and faith forever. So, what did Christ reveal to him?
Gary Busey dropped this jaw-dropping bombshell during an interview with PMT, sharing the chilling details of a motorcycle accident that left him clinically lifeless for 2 hours. Yeah, you heard that right. 2 hours without a heartbeat. He described it with vivid clarity, a strange sense of calm, like floating in some uncharted territory between life and whatever comes after. A close call like this doesn't just pass by. It imprints itself on your soul, transforming how you view everything. Busey woke up a different man, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually rebooted. Every decision he's made since, from career moves to personal beliefs, has been filtered through this new surreal lens. The crash happened when Busey was cruising on his Harley-Davidson at 40 miles per hour. The catch? He wasn't wearing a helmet. One bad turn later, he slammed his head against a curb with brutal force, leaving him with injuries so severe they sound like something out of a medical drama. His skull fractured on the right side. And that's not even the worst part. Surgeons had to take bones from his pelvis to patch up the damage. Yep, the man literally donated to himself. But trust Busey to find humor in the chaos. He compared the ordeal to getting whacked by a rogue golf ball on an accidental fairway stroll. Physical recovery was just one side of the coin, though. What really shook him, and continues to define him, was what he felt in those 2 lifeless hours. Busey says he entered a spiritual dimension where he was surrounded by what he describes as heavenly beings. He described his soul as this small, narrow strip tucked tightly inside his spinal column. It's not the kind of thing you hear every day, but it's clear this experience marked him forever. Gary Busey doesn't just tell his story, he lives it in every word, every action. He says he knows what it's like to step into the spiritual realm surrounded by angels, where his essence was reduced to a 12-inch long paper-thin strip. Let that sink in for a second. That wild, supernatural brush with something beyond left him a changed man. After the accident, Busey didn't just sit around reflecting. He took action. He went to Washington, D.C. and sat down with major political figures like John McCain, Orrin Hatch, and Ted Kennedy. His story and passion made waves, playing a huge role in getting the Traumatic Brain Injury Act signed by President Bill Clinton in 1996. This law became a lifeline for people battling the aftermath of traumatic brain injuries, giving them better care and resources. The real transformation ran deeper than the system. It took root in Busey himself. His entire perspective flipped. Every single day became a gift, a new chapter he didn't take for granted. He started seeing things differently, even calling some days Busha days. What's that? It's when the world feels like it's revealing itself for the first time. Ordinary moments suddenly become extraordinary. Ever felt like that? Busey lives it. Here's where it gets even more fascinating. After the crash, Busey discovered he had new skills and a razor-sharp awareness he didn't have before. Tasks that once felt impossible. Suddenly, they were a breeze. It's as if the accident unlocked a part of his brain he didn't even know existed. But Busey didn't stop there. He turned his pain into purpose, becoming one of the loudest voices for mandatory helmet laws across the country. For him, helmets aren't just gear, they're lifesavers. He calls the brain our personal computer, the core of everything we are emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and physically. And he's on a mission to make sure no one has to endure what he went through. Gary Busey's story goes beyond surviving a life-threatening accident. It's a proof of transforming personal tragedy into a powerful force for change. From a devastating crash to becoming a powerful advocate for safety and awareness, his journey proves that even the worst moments can spark positive change. And let's be real, Busey didn't just change a little after the accident. He flipped the whole script. But how did this seismic shift impact his career and the larger-than-life personality we all know today? Even Donald Trump, the former president of the United States, once called Gary Busey brilliant and a genius. That might sound like a bold claim, but when you look at Busey's career, it kind of tracks. The man has done it all. Action heroes, unhinged villains, stand-up comedy, reality TV, and let's not forget his status as one of Hollywood's most fascinating cultural icons. He's unpredictable, larger than life, and completely unforgettable. Busey's climb to fame kicked off in the 1980s, when his high-energy performances and off-screen antics made him a household name. Over the years, he's cemented his place as a beloved yet completely unconventional figure in Hollywood. People often call him Hollywood's favorite crazy uncle, and honestly, it fits. Whether he's cracking people up or making them raise an eyebrow, Busey's charm comes from his unfiltered, unapologetic personality. Think of his career as a wild road trip. Some parts are smooth and straightforward, others feel like a detour to nowhere, but every so often you hit a scenic overlook that leaves you speechless. That's Gary Busey in a nutshell. His moments of brilliance, whether in movies, interviews, or just being himself, are unforgettable, even if the journey getting there is anything but typical. Busey's movie roles are a mixed bag. Some have been critically adored, while others, let's just say they've landed on the wrong side of Rotten Tomatoes. But that's part of his charm. He's the kind of actor who can deliver a performance so good it's jaw-dropping, or so out there, it's impossible to ignore. It's this unpredictability that keeps people intrigued, whether they love him, hate him, or simply don't know what to make of him. Gary Busey's career and life are proof that success doesn't have to follow a straight line. He's been praised as a genius, questioned for his eccentricity, and celebrated for being one of Hollywood's true originals. Love him or scratch your head at him. One thing's for sure, Gary Busey is impossible to forget. Gary Busey has a way of pulling you in, whether it's through his intense performances or that unmistakable wild-eyed energy. But there's one question that pops up again and again. What happened to Gary Busey? It's not just curiosity, it's a mix of amazement and a little confusion, given how unpredictable his career has been. To really understand the man behind the legend, you have to rewind to the beginning. Born in 1944 in Goose Creek, Texas, Busey's early life was anything but Hollywood. He started off chasing a football dream in college, but when an injury sidelined him, he found his way to theater. Turns out, it was a game changer. On top of acting, he also had serious skills behind the drums, jamming with icons like Willie Nelson and performing under the stage name Teddy Jack Eddy. While his music career was promising, acting was always his endgame. His first brush with fame came on television, where he made waves as the last character killed off in the classic series Gunsmoke. From there, he began snagging small roles in films during the early 70s. Titles like Angels Hard as They Come and The Magnificent Seven Ride might not have made him a household name, but they were stepping stones. Then came meteor parts in projects like Bloodsport and the execution of Private Slovak alongside Martin Sheen. Slowly but surely, Hollywood was starting to take notice. Busey's big break arrived in the 1976 remake of A Star is Born, where he shared the screen with none other than Barbra Streisand. Playing a road manager, Busey finally had the chance to show a wider audience what he could do. It wasn't just another role, it was the one that opened doors to bigger and better opportunities. This was the turning point that took him from that guy in the background to someone you couldn't ignore. But as with everything in Busey's life, his rise in Hollywood was anything but straightforward. The road ahead would be full of incredible highs and shocking turns. Gary Busey's career was just heating up when he landed what many consider his most iconic role, Buddy Holly in the Buddy Holly Story. This wasn't just another biopic. It was the performance of a lifetime. Busey didn't just act. He became Buddy Holly. Singing and playing all the songs live, without any dubbing, he brought an authenticity to the role that left critics and audiences in awe. The performance earned him an Academy Award nomination and cemented his place in Hollywood history. Many still call it one of the greatest biographical performances ever put on film. As the 1980s rolled in, Busey kept the momentum going, taking on a range of eclectic roles. He starred in Carney alongside Jodie Foster and tackled the Western genre with Barbarossa, a film that earned critical praise. Of course, not every role was a smash hit. Projects like DC Cab and The Bear were less memorable. That said, The Bear still stands out for one wild reason. Busey actually wrestled a live bear during filming. But even wrestling a grizzly wasn't the most insane part of Busey's 80s run. In late 1985, Busey took on the role of Uncle Red in the Stephen King-penned werewolf thriller Silver Bullet. While the movie itself didn't wow critics or dominate the box office, it brought in just over $12 million. It holds a special place in Busey's career for what happened behind the scenes. Stephen King, the man behind the script, noticed something unexpected during filming. While the cast was nailing their lines, it was Busey's off-the-cuff improvisation that really made Uncle Red come alive. His unscripted moments had such a natural charm and energy that many of them replaced King's carefully written dialogue in the final cut. It raises an interesting debate. Was Busey's unpredictable creativity better than King's storytelling? Critics may have had mixed reactions to the movie, but Busey's performance left an impression. He proved that his unique, free-spirited approach to acting could elevate even the most scripted projects. Whether you see Silver Bullet as an underrated gem or just another werewolf flick, there's no denying that Busey's raw energy gave the movie its bite. This period of his career showcased what Gary Busey does best: pushing boundaries, taking risks, and making every role his own. From Oscar-worthy performances to wrestling wild animals and outshining a Stephen King script, Busey's unpredictable journey through Hollywood was only just beginning. Even though Silver Bullet didn't light up the box office, Gary Busey's performance left its mark. While critics might have been lukewarm, audiences took notice, and over the years, the film earned a cult following. Today, many fans call it one of the best Stephen King adaptations, with Busey's portrayal of Uncle Red standing out as a highlight. It's one of those rare cases where time has turned a sleeper film into a fan favorite. By 1986, Busey's career hit a bit of a rough patch. He took roles in 2 action films, Let's Get Harry and Eye of the Tiger, but neither made much noise. Both films came and went without leaving a dent in the box office, or his career. By the following year, Busey was struggling to regain the momentum he had after the Buddy Holly story. He hadn't landed any significant roles in years, and it felt like his Hollywood star was starting to dim. But Busey wasn't ready to fade into the background. In 1987, he decided to step out of his comfort zone and audition for a role in Lethal Weapon. And not just any role. He wanted to play the villain. It was a bold move for someone who hadn't auditioned in years, and Busey admitted to feeling nervous. He even joked about having Gary Busey butterflies, which, let's be honest, probably felt a little wilder than regular butterflies. The film's producers were searching for someone who could match Mel Gibson's intensity, someone dangerous, unhinged, and downright terrifying. Of course, that would be Gary Busey. From the moment he walked in, it was clear he was perfect for the part. Busey delivered a chilling performance as Mr. Joshua, a cold-blooded enforcer who made audiences genuinely uneasy. His unrelenting intensity and larger-than-life presence didn't just complement the film, they elevated it. Busey's work in Lethal Weapon transcended a great performance. It became the defining milestone of his career. He proved that he could reinvent himself, stepping into darker, more complex roles with ease. The film's success also reminded Hollywood that Gary Busey wasn't just a quirky character actor. He was a force to be reckoned with. This was more than just a win for Busey's career. It was a full-blown comeback. Lethal Weapon put him back on the map, and from there, his career took off in a whole new direction. Sometimes all it takes is one unforgettable role to change everything. And for Busey, Mr. Joshua was that role. Gary Busey often called his time on Lethal Weapon a blessing, and it's easy to see why. Working alongside legends like Mel Gibson and Danny Glover under the seasoned direction of Richard Donner gave him the space to deliver one of his most unforgettable performances. Busey didn't just show up. He owned the role of Mr. Joshua, earning praise from critics and fans alike. He even credited his co-stars and Donner for pushing him to bring his A-game. The role not only revived his fading career, but also cemented his reputation as an actor who could bring real depth to even the darkest characters. But just when it seemed like Busey was back on track, his career hit another rough patch. Following Lethal Weapon, Busey starred in 3 films: Bulletproof, Age of Piracy, and Hider in the House. Unfortunately, none of these projects clicked with audiences or critics. The momentum he'd built with Lethal Weapon seemed to fizzle out, leaving Busey once again at a crossroads in his career. But just when he thought things couldn't get worse, life threw him another struggle that changed everything. 5 days after wrapping up Hider in the House, Busey was involved in a devastating motorcycle accident. Riding without a helmet, he crashed and suffered life-threatening injuries, including a fractured skull. The crash left him in critical condition and on the brink of death, forcing him to endure an incredibly grueling recovery process. This wasn't just a physical battle, it was emotional and spiritual too. For Busey, the accident became a turning point. It interrupted his already struggling career and forced him to confront some of life's toughest questions. In the process, he began to reevaluate everything, from his priorities to the way he approached his work and personal relationships. Less than 2 years after surviving the crash, Gary Busey made his return to the big screen in Predator 2. Originally, the role was supposed to go to John Lithgow, but producer Joel Silver, who had worked with Busey on Lethal Weapon, lobbied for him to take the part. It was a gamble, but it paid off. Busey stepped into the role with the kind of energy and grit that only someone who'd stared death in the face could bring. Predator 2 wasn't just another role for Busey. It stood as undeniable proof of his resilience, showing the world he could rise from even the darkest chapters of his life. It marked the beginning of a new phase in his career, where resilience became his defining trait. What challenges and opportunities would this new chapter bring? If there's one thing Busey's story shows, it's that you can never count him out. While the movie packed a punch with its ambitious mix of gang warfare, science fiction elements, and suspense, it didn't quite hit the mark financially, pulling in $57 million worldwide, far less than the first movie's $100 million. Critics and audiences were lukewarm at the time, but like many of Busey's projects, it found its audience later. Now, Predator 2 is seen as an underrated gem, appreciated for its bold storytelling and standout performances from both Gary Busey and Danny Glover. In 1991, Busey juggled a variety of projects. He starred in My Heroes Have Always Been Cowboys, a heartfelt drama, and played a tough, abusive manager in Wild Texas Wind, a TV movie where he shared the screen with Dolly Parton. But the role that really stood out that year was in Kathryn Bigelow's Point Break. In Point Break, Busey played the gruff, lovable FBI agent Angelo Pappas, who teams up with Johnny Utah, played by a young Keanu Reeves, to take down a gang of surfing bank robbers. The movie became an instant cult classic, earning $83 million worldwide and leaving audiences hooked on its adrenaline-pumping mix of crime and surf culture. On set, Busey took Reeves under his wing, offering guidance and mentorship to the rising star. Years later, Point Break inspired a remake, but Busey wasn't shy about doubting its quality, even without seeing it. Fans often compare the original to films like The Fast and the Furious, but with a gnarly surf vibe that gave it a one-of-a-kind energy. Despite the success of Point Break, Busey's challenges didn't disappear. His career remained unpredictable, filled with hits and misses, but he continued to deliver memorable performances in a variety of roles. In 1992, Busey mixed things up with diverse projects. He appeared as himself in Robert Altman's Hollywood satire The Player, starred in the TV movie Chrome Soldiers as a soldier investigating his brother's suspicious death, and took on a dramatic role in Canvas, where his character joins an art heist to save his brother's life. But none of these projects matched the impact of his villainous turn in Under Siege. Starring opposite Steven Seagal, Busey played Commander Krill, a deranged naval officer who helps hijack a U.S. battleship. The movie became a box office hit and is still regarded as one of Seagal's best films. Busey's over-the-top performance as Krill added a layer of intensity and humor to the film, stealing scenes even in the midst of all the action. This period showcased Busey's ability to bounce between genres, comedy, action, drama, and even satire. His versatility kept him in the mix, even as the ups and downs of Hollywood continued to test his resilience. Whether as a grumpy FBI agent, a deranged villain, or himself, Busey proved he could bring something unforgettable to every role. Under Siege became a milestone in Gary Busey's career, solidifying his reputation as one of Hollywood's go-to villains. Critics and fans alike praised his ability to outshine even Steven Seagal, bringing a sense of chaos and charisma to the role of Commander Krill. It wasn't just a hit, it was one of the highest-grossing films of his career. But Busey wasn't done yet. His next big project, The Firm, took his career to an entirely new level. Based on John Grisham's best-selling novel, The Firm became a massive success, raking in $270 million and earning the title of the most successful Grisham adaptation of its time. Busey played a pivotal supporting role, proving once again his knack for elevating a film. His performance added depth and intrigue, enhancing his reputation as a versatile and reliable actor who could steal the spotlight even in small roles. Amid these blockbuster successes, Busey took a surprising turn with Rookie of the Year, a heartwarming family baseball movie. Playing an aging pitcher, his character starts off as a grump, resenting the young rookie protagonist, but ultimately transforms into a mentor. The role showed a softer side of Busey, proving his range wasn't limited to action-packed thrillers or intense dramas. Then came Drop Zone, an action film starring Wesley Snipes. While the movie wasn't a smash hit, its high-flying stunts and adrenaline-pumping sequences kept audiences entertained. For Busey, it was another chance to show his versatility, even if the film itself received mixed reviews. But while Busey's on-screen momentum seemed steady, his personal life was spiraling. In 1995, he faced a life-threatening overdose due to a serious drug addiction. The incident became a wake-up call, forcing him to confront his struggles and begin the long road to recovery. Over time, Busey has been open about his battles, using his story to inspire others dealing with addiction. This turning point marked a shift not just in his personal life, but in his career as well. After his recovery, Busey began taking on an astonishing number of roles, over 80 films since the mid-90s. Most of these didn't make it to theaters, but the sheer volume of his work showcased his dedication to the craft. While the days of blockbuster hits became fewer, Busey remained a steady presence in the industry, carving out a unique niche with his quirky charm and unmistakable energy. Gary Busey's career in the 90s was a whirlwind of highs and lows, showcasing his ability to shine in a range of roles while battling personal demons. From stealing scenes as a villain to mentoring young characters in family films, his journey proved that reinvention is always possible, even in the face of immense challenges. Gary Busey's later career is a patchwork of quirky roles, indie projects, and occasional mainstream hits. He dove headfirst into a wide range of genres, from gritty thrillers like A Man with a Gun to the darkly comedic Livers Ain't Cheap and more dramatic fare like Carried Away. While these films didn't achieve the same level of success as his earlier works, they let Busey continue doing what he loved, bringing his distinctive energy to the screen. Busey leaned into his reputation for taking on unconventional roles. In The Ginger Dead Man, he played a killer reincarnated as a psychotic gingerbread cookie. Yes, really. And in Piranha 3DD, he embraced the absurdity of a campy horror comedy with gusto. These projects weren't blockbusters, but they gave him the freedom to unleash his unique flair. But he wasn't all about quirky comedies. In films like A Sight for Sore Eyes and The Prize Fighter, Busey showed he could still handle serious roles, even if the movies didn't make a huge splash. Then there's Quigley, where he played a man reincarnated as a Pomeranian dog. Yes, it's as odd as it sounds, but Busey dove into the role with his trademark enthusiasm. Projects like Frost, Portrait of a Vampire, and Mansion of Blood reinforced his willingness to take on eccentric experimental films, no matter how unconventional. Busey didn't just stick to movies, he ventured into video games, lending his voice and persona to projects that brought him to a new audience. His unmistakable personality made him a natural fit for the interactive medium, adding another layer to his diverse and unpredictable career. Busey became a recurring cultural touchstone, popping up in cameo roles on hit shows like The Simpsons, American Dad, and Family Guy. These guest appearances weren't just throwaways. They showcased his self-aware sense of humor and solidified his reputation as a beloved eccentric. Fans loved seeing Busey play exaggerated versions of himself, blending his offbeat charm with sharp comedic timing. Busey's jump into reality television was another career twist that few could have predicted. He appeared on Celebrity Apprentice, where his unpredictable antics made for must-watch moments. But his real reality TV triumph came on Celebrity Big Brother in the UK, where he won the show and charmed fans worldwide with his quirky, larger-than-life personality. Love him or find him puzzling, it was clear that Busey could capture attention and affection in any medium. And perhaps one of his most eccentric projects yet, Busey starred in Gary Busey, Pet Judge. The premise? Busey presided over a courtroom to settle disputes involving pets. It was part comedy, part absurdist genius, and 100% Busey. This series not only showcased his humor, but also played on his real-life love for animals, making it a perfect fit for his offbeat image. Even as he entertained, Busey faced serious personal battles. He overcame a brain tumor and continued his long journey through substance abuse recovery, proving his resilience time and again. Despite these struggles, he remained a fixture in pop culture, beloved for his authenticity, eccentricity, and refusal to give up. Gary Busey's Hollywood journey has been nothing short of extraordinary. From his Oscar-nominated performance as Buddy Holly to playing memorable villains in films like Lethal Weapon, and later reinventing himself as a cult favorite and TV personality, Busey's path has been a wild ride. Few actors have managed to adapt as creatively, embracing roles as varied as fictional characters, real-life cameos, and even exaggerated versions of himself. But Gary Busey isn't the only star who's had a brush with death that changed everything. Sure, some celebs make a posthumous comeback through holograms, but a rare few have actually been brought back to life. Resurrected, if you will. Back in 2013, Gizmodo tackled the grim question: how long can your heart stop before it's game over? The answer: it's tricky. While there's no hard and fast rule, brain cells typically start dying 4 to 6 minutes after the heart stops pumping blood. So if your ticker goes on strike, time isn't exactly on your side. Among the 7 celebrities we discovered who have literally been to the other side and back, most were saved within that window. But one defied the odds, surviving well beyond the expected limit to tell their story. From overdoses to freak accidents, these stars all found themselves at death's door and somehow came back. Whether it's luck, divine intervention, or medical miracles, their stories are nothing short of extraordinary. Nikki Sixx, legendary bassist of Motley Crue, has a death-defying story that sounds like it's straight out of a rock and roll myth. Long before he got sober in 2001 and became a vocal advocate for addiction recovery, heroin almost ended his life, literally. Actually, it did, Sixx wrote in a 2017 Los Angeles Times op-ed. In 1987, during one wild night of partying, Sixx was declared clinically dead for 2 minutes after overdosing on a lethal mix of illicit substances. It all went down at Hollywood's Franklin Plaza Apartments, where Sixx's dealer injected him with what turned out to be a fatal dose. His heart gave out, and while someone managed to call an ambulance, Six's body was already shutting down. According to media outlets, this all happened on December 23, just before Christmas. Paramedics had to administer not one, but 2 shots of adrenaline to jumpstart his heart and bring him back to life. But what makes Six's story even more incredible is what he experienced during those 2 minutes of death. In his memoir, The Dirt, he described an out-of-body experience. "It felt like something gentle was pulling my head upward," he wrote, recalling how everything above him glowed bright white. Looking down, he realized he had completely left his body. Nikki Sixx's brush with death became a pivotal moment in his life, sparking a transformation that eventually led him to sobriety and a new purpose, helping others find recovery and hope. What's more, Nikki Sixx's near-death experience didn't just save his life, it also inspired Motley Crue's hit single, "Kickstart My Heart." But not everyone agrees on how it went down. Drummer Steven Adler shared a very different version of events during an interview with Australia's Triple M. According to Adler, there were no adrenaline shots involved. Instead, he claimed, "I dragged him into the shower with a broken hand, turned on the cold water, and started slapping him in the face with my cast." When paramedics showed up, Adler says they simply performed chest compressions. And that was it. Either way, Nikki Sixx's survival became one of rock's most legendary comeback stories. Meanwhile, Guns N' Roses guitarist Slash has his own death-defying tale, one he refers to as a bad ending to a wonderful evening. In the early 2000s, Slash was partying hard in San Francisco. After a blowout fight with his fiancée, he decided to dive headfirst into what he called smack heaven. "I'm in Frisco, I'm going to get loaded," he thought. And for a while, it was fun. But then, things took a dark turn. He collapsed in the hallway of his hotel, and, for 8 minutes, was clinically dead. According to Slash, it all started at 5 in the morning when drug dealers showed up to his room with everything he could possibly want. He took it all. Later, while stumbling down the hallway, he asked a maid for directions to the elevator, and then collapsed right in front of her. "It freaked out the little Spanish lady," Slash quipped during an interview. What he remembers next is surreal. As he told BBC Radio 5, coming back to life was like being jolted awake by a massive surge of energy. "It's this huge shock of energy and lights and voices. It's unmistakable," he explained. That moment, combined with the overdose itself, left a mark on Slash's life, serving as a wake-up call he'll never forget. After being revived, Slash did what only a true rock star would do. He checked himself out of the hospital. "I came around in the hospital and left because we had a show the next night," he told Louder. He even joked that his quick return to the stage puts Axl Rose's occasional delays into perspective. If dying wasn't enough to stop Slash, a late start to a concert definitely wouldn't be either. Comedian Tracy Morgan faced a very different kind of life-altering moment. In June 2014, Morgan was involved in a devastating road accident when a tractor trailer crashed into the back of his limo bus, causing it to spin out and overturn. The accident, which CNN called catastrophic, left Morgan in critical condition. Tragically, his close friend and fellow comedian James McNair lost his life, while 3 other passengers were also seriously injured. Morgan himself suffered multiple fractures, including a broken leg, nose, and ribs, and slipped into a coma for 2 weeks. When he finally woke up, he had no memory of the crash and was left battling memory loss, recurring headaches, and frequent nosebleeds. The aftermath of the accident was a long and painful road, not just physically, but emotionally, as Morgan came to terms with the loss of his friend and the fragility of life itself. In October 2015, Tracy Morgan made his highly anticipated comeback to Saturday Night Live, a moment that symbolized his resilience and recovery. Reflecting on the journey in an interview with Complex, a month later, Morgan admitted that life would never go back to the way it was. He explained that surviving such a traumatic experience fundamentally changes a person, and there's no going back to normal. He revealed something extraordinary. During his time in the hospital, he actually died. Morgan shared that he experienced what he calls the other side. He described how he felt reassured by a divine presence that told him his time wasn't up yet. According to him, God told him that his room wasn't ready, and there were still things left for him to accomplish. For Morgan, that moment became a powerful motivator to keep moving forward and fulfilling his purpose, including sitting down for that very interview. Josh Homme, the frontman of Queens of the Stone Age, faced death in a far less publicized way during a surgery in 2017. Homme later revealed that he had contracted MRSA, an aggressive antibiotic-resistant staph infection that weakened his immune system to the point where he couldn't fight back. He described the infection as something that often kills people. And, for a moment, it killed him too. During the procedure, complications arose when doctors tried to insert an oxygen tube. Homme explained that the process went wrong, and he ended up choking to death on the operating table. Although doctors managed to revive him and successfully complete the surgery, his life was forever changed. When Homme woke up, he immediately sensed something wasn't right. He explained that as someone who had always experienced music playing in his mind, the silence was shocking. For years after the incident, he said he couldn't hear any music in his head, leaving him creatively adrift and painfully aware of how close he had come to losing it all. Not just his life, but the essence of who he was. Josh Homme now looks back on his near-death experience with surprising gratitude. Speaking on a podcast, he explained that being bedridden for months after his ordeal gave him a fresh perspective on life. He spent 4 months stuck in a room with tubes in his leg, a situation he admits was challenging, but ultimately transformative. Homme shared that it was one of the best things that could have happened to him because it forced him to reevaluate what truly matters. "I'm really thankful for it because I know what's important," he reflected. When it comes to wild moments, few can top Ozzy Osbourne, the man who famously bit off a bat's head during a concert in 1982. But the most shocking moment of his life happened in 2003 when he died briefly in an ATV accident before being brought back to life. As Sharon Osbourne later recounted, Ozzy stopped breathing for a minute and a half with no pulse. The harrowing scene was even caught on camera by MTV's crew, who were filming the Osbournes at the time. The footage showed Ozzy lying lifeless beside his ATV after crashing on his British country estate. According to Sharon, Ozzy had hit something while riding the quad bike, causing it to flip and land on top of him. Thankfully, a security guard who was nearby sprang into action. Sharon credited the guard for saving Ozzy's life, explaining that he performed resuscitation, got him breathing again, and restarted his pulse. Without his quick thinking, the legendary rocker's story might have ended there. But instead, Ozzy lived to tell the tale and add another unbelievable chapter to his already wild legacy. After his ATV accident, Ozzy Osbourne's injuries were as severe as they come. According to E! News, he was rushed to the hospital with 6 broken ribs, a fractured collarbone, and a broken vertebra in his neck. His condition required emergency surgery to lift his collarbone, restoring blood flow to a major artery and stopping bleeding in his lungs. Post-surgery, Ozzy was placed on a ventilator to aid his recovery. Despite the odds, the Prince of Darkness made a full recovery, adding another miraculous escape to his legendary rock and roll life. On July 13, 1996, Pantera frontman Phil Anselmo had his own brush with death after a concert in Dallas. Following the show, Anselmo injected some illicit substance and overdosed, causing his heart to stop for what he later described as 4 to 5 minutes. In an official press release following the incident, Anselmo described the experience as utterly void of the stereotypical near-death imagery. There were no lights, no music, just a complete nothingness. He recounted how his friends panicked, slapping him and pouring water over his head for 20 minutes while waiting for paramedics to arrive. When he regained consciousness in the back of an ambulance, it was adrenaline that brought him back to life. However, the overdose left him unshaken personally. Speaking to MMTV, Anselmo admitted, "It didn't really shake me up. I overdosed and killed myself for about 4 minutes, and I think it shook everybody else up more than me." He described the state he was in during those few minutes as blissful, with no memory of the ordeal, though he later expressed deep embarrassment over what had happened. Vowing never to touch drugs again, Anselmo said he had truly learned from his mistakes, a sentiment that marked a turning point in his tumultuous career. In a 2018 interview with Andy Vero, Phil Anselmo spoke candidly about his near-death experience, emphasizing that there's no faking death. Reflecting on what it felt like, he likened it to an absence so profound it reminded him of how it feels to have never existed, saying it was a state of insignificance and impossibility. His experience reaffirmed his strong anti-theist beliefs, as he described it as devoid of any spiritual or divine elements. Though Anselmo has faced ongoing struggles with addiction, he marked a significant milestone in September 2018, celebrating 9 months of sobriety, a small but meaningful step in his battle to stay clean. Al Jourgensen, the founder and frontman of the industrial metal band Ministry, has an unparalleled history with death, having been legally declared dead multiple times. Speaking to Loudwire in 2013, Jourgensen revealed that there are 3 confirmed instances of his death, though he joked there may be more he can't recall due to his 2-decade-long battle with heroin addiction. His biographer, John Wiederhorn, dug into hospital records and verified that Jourgensen's brushes with death were no exaggeration. Reflecting on those moments, Jourgensen admitted that only one truly stood out as life-changing. He described it as a deeply spiritual experience, one that convinced him there is an afterlife. The other 2, he chalked those up to being too heavily intoxicated to process what had happened. For Al Jourgensen, surviving multiple near-death experiences wasn't the wake-up call that finally pushed him to get clean. Instead, it was something far smaller and creepier, a spider. Speaking to Louder, the Ministry frontman shared that his turning point came while crashing on a drug dealer's couch, clutching the last guitar he hadn't pawned off. It was there that he got bitten by a spider, a seemingly minor event that spiraled into a life-threatening ordeal. The bite became so severe that a doctor warned him the infected arm might need to be amputated. "I was at death's door," Jourgensen recalled. At the time, he was burning through $500 a day on illicit substances. His savings were gone, and all but one of his guitars had been sold to feed his addiction. "I'd hit rock bottom," he admitted. That moment forced a hard truth. "A light bulb went on over my head," Jourgensen said. He realized it was time to make a choice, either turn his life around or give up entirely. In his own words, "If you want to die, die today." Fortunately, he chose life, using that rock-bottom moment as the foundation for change. For Jourgensen, it wasn't the brushes with death that motivated him to fight for sobriety, but the grim realization of how much more he could lose if he didn't stop. These celebrity resuscitation stories are insane to say the least, but turns out that plenty of ordinary people have stories just as wild. Let's be real. Death is the one thing none of us can escape, and that's exactly why life feels so precious. It's the ticking clock in the background that makes us want to do something meaningful. Ever heard of a bucket list? That's what it's all about. Making the most of our time while we still have it. But let's face it, how often do we actually live like we're on borrowed time? Instead of chasing dreams or creating epic memories, most of us are stuck in the grind, sitting in traffic, checking off homework, folding endless piles of laundry, or scrolling through Instagram until we forget why we even picked up our phones. Sound familiar? Life's too short for autopilot, but it's so easy to get lost in the routine, isn't it? Not everyone lets life slip by unnoticed. If there's one group of people who truly get how precious it is, it's those who've stared death in the face. You know, the ones who've been through near-death experiences, literally hanging on by a thread. Their stories? Nothing short of life-changing. Let's start with Jeffrey Olsen, a man whose life was shattered in an instant, but who came out the other side with a whole new perspective. 25 years ago, Jeffrey was driving his wife and 2 young sons home to Bountiful, Utah, after an Easter family gathering. Exhausted, he nodded off for just a second. That split moment changed everything. At 75 miles per hour, the car flipped multiple times, leaving a scene of unimaginable devastation. When Jeffrey came to, pinned in the wreckage, he immediately knew his wife and infant son were gone. His older son survived, but Jeffrey's own injuries were catastrophic: broken back, ruptured intestines, and the loss of a leg. He spent 6 months in the hospital and endured 18 surgeries. For over a decade, Jeffrey couldn't bring himself to speak about that day. But when he finally did, the things he shared were nothing short of extraordinary. What really happened in those moments, and how did it change his entire outlook on life? "My soul straight up left my body," Jeffrey Olsen tells Shondaland. "I felt more alive than I've ever been, like my consciousness had been turned up to full blast." He describes being surrounded by what he calls a bubble of light, completely suspended in its glow. And then, something truly mind-blowing happened. His wife, who he knew was no longer alive, communicated with him. She kept telling me, "You can't stay. You've got to go back." It wasn't just words. It was a whole conversation. We talked about how, if I stayed with her, our oldest son would be left all alone, orphaned. Together, we made the choice that I'd return and raise him. For me, purpose is deeply tied to free will and choice. Jeffrey's story isn't just about surviving. It's about an entirely different level of awareness. Like many who've had near-death experiences, he describes the surreal feeling of leaving his body, watching himself from above, floating through time and space. But it didn't stop there. He says he knew everyone around him, including the hospital staff, working desperately to save his life. "I understood them completely," he explains. "Their love, their fears, their struggles, their triumphs, everything. It was like we were all connected, like they were me and I was them. That sense of oneness changed me forever." Jeffrey Olsen reflects on how his near-death experience deepened his understanding of his faith, aligning him with the core messages of love and compassion. Growing up in a conservative Christian home, he now connects deeply with the teachings of Jesus, feeling an overwhelming sense of unity with others. He explains that in that moment of transcendence, he felt like he was everyone, the prisoner, the beggar, and was surrounded by an unconditional love, so powerful that any judgments or comparisons vanished completely. Although Olsen has written a book, Knowing, Memoirs of a Journey Beyond the Veil and Choosing Joy After Tragic Loss, he doesn't see his purpose in being a famous author or leading a massive following. In fact, he's stepped away from social media entirely. For him, purpose isn't about big platforms or flashy titles. It's in the little everyday moments. He believes real change starts close to home. By focusing on being a loving husband, father, and friend, he feels he's fulfilling his deepest calling. "For me, that's the real purpose," he says. "It's personal and grounded." And then there's Ingrid Honkola, who faced death even earlier in life. At just 2 or 3 years old, she had a near-death experience that still shapes her perspective. Living in Bogota, Colombia, with her family, young Ingrid was being watched by a housekeeper while playing near a large tank of water used for washing clothes. What started as innocent play turned tragic when she fell into the tank and began to drown. Her consciousness started fading, and it could have ended there. But something remarkable happened. Her mother, who was at work, was struck by an unshakable feeling that something was wrong. Acting on pure instinct, she rushed home just in time to save her daughter and bring her back to life. Ingrid's story, though brief in the moment, holds lessons she's carried with her for a lifetime. What did this early brush with death teach her about life, connection, and purpose? In a heartfelt video, Ingrid Honkola shares what her mother saw that day. A lifeless little girl, lips blue, body limp like a rag doll. By all appearances, she was gone. But for Ingrid, something extraordinary was happening beyond what anyone could see. She describes experiencing a completely different dimension, a realm of nothingness. There was no sound, color, movement, or even meaning. just a profound sense of being, a feeling of oneness with everything around her. And despite the stillness, she remembers feeling an unshakable assurance that everything would be okay. Meanwhile, back in the physical world, her mother, trained in CPR, was working desperately to bring her back. Ingrid recalls the jarring sensation of being pulled back into her body, suddenly acutely aware of how heavy, uncomfortable, and limiting it felt compared to the freedom of the other realm. But that return to life wasn't just about survival. It sparked something entirely new within her. From that moment, Ingrid noticed extraordinary changes. She could read, solve math problems, and untangle puzzles far beyond her age. Even more striking was a heightened awareness of life itself, a deeper understanding that shaped the way she saw the world from then on. It was more than a brush with death. It was a profound transformation that reshaped the course of her entire life. Ingrid Honkala shares a striking realization from her near-death experience. Humans aren't just physical beings. We're eternal spirits. This clarity shifted her entire perspective on life. She explains that the attachment many of us feel to the material world faded for her after this experience. It's something I've noticed in a lot of people who've had near-death experiences, she says. We don't cling as much to earthly roles because we've seen a deeper truth. We are so much more than what we do or who we think we are. To me, the true purpose of life is to remember that we are the light of the universe. Despite her spiritual awakening, Ingrid didn't abandon her intellectual pursuits. She earned a PhD in marine science and climbed to the top of her field, working with NASA, the Colombian Navy, and UNESCO. But eventually, she decided to leave it all behind to follow a calling that felt more in tune with her purpose. She turned to writing, sharing her journey in A Brightly Guided Life, how a scientist learned to hear her inner wisdom, which beautifully marries science and spirituality. Now, Ingrid dedicates her life to helping others connect with their deeper selves. Through mentoring, lectures, and retreats, she encourages people to raise their consciousness and live with intention. Her story is a powerful reminder that purpose isn't about achievements or accolades. It's about remembering who we truly are and living from that place. Ingrid Honkala firmly believes that everything in the universe has a purpose. Reflecting on her own life, she says every experience, no matter how big or small, led her to where she is today. Her mission? To shine her inner light in everything she does. And she believes this applies to everyone, no matter their role in life. Whether you're a doctor, a carpenter, or a housekeeper. For Ingrid, purpose is about service and creativity, using both to illuminate the world around you. We're here to help each other remember, she says. So, in my daily life, I ask myself, how can I bring light to the world? On the flip side of this exploration of purpose is Peter Panagore, whose near-death experience led him in an entirely different direction. His brush with death wasn't about light, but the biting cold of a frozen wilderness. It was 1980s, and Peter, then 21 years old, was ice climbing with a friend on a mountain straddling the Alberta and British Columbia border in Canada. A seasoned adventurer familiar with snowy landscapes and survival techniques, Peter wasn't new to challenging expeditions, but this trip would push him to his absolute limit and beyond. What went wrong, and how did it lead him to question everything, even his faith? Peter Panagore and his friend were woefully unprepared for the harsh conditions of their climb. As the sun set, the temperature plunged by 30 degrees, and the pair found themselves stranded on a precarious ledge far behind the faster climbers. The freezing air quickly took its toll on Peter's body. He began violently shivering, his vision blurred, and even his eyeballs started to freeze. The final stages of hypothermia crept in, and as he drifted toward unconsciousness, his vision faded to black, closing, as he describes it, like a camera shutter. But what he saw next wasn't the mountain. Instead, he describes encountering an infinite darkness, vast and consuming. In this moment, Peter says he communicated with a being, pleading for the chance to return to life. Hours later, his friend shook him awake, certain Peter had died. Still dazed and unsure of what had just happened, Peter returned to consciousness with a renewed sense of purpose. "I was stunned," he recalls. "I didn't understand it at first, but I knew I came back for a reason." What was it about this harrowing experience that reshaped Peter's life, and why did it lead him to let go of his faith? After his near-death experience, Peter Panagore devoted his life to spiritual exploration, becoming a progressive Christian minister. His mission was clear: to dive deep into the mysteries of what had happened to him and help others connect with the divine along the way. His work put him in touch with people across the spectrum of human struggle: homeless individuals, the sick, the grieving, abuse survivors, and the dying. For Peter, it was a way to bridge the gap between the spiritual and the everyday, to bring meaning to what he'd experienced on that freezing mountain ledge. But life threw him another hurdle. In 2016, around the release of his book, Heaven is Beautiful: How Dying Taught Me That Death is Just the Beginning, Peter had a second near-death experience when he suffered a heart attack. This time, the shift in his perspective was even more profound. Peter walked away from traditional religious beliefs, particularly the idea of Jesus as a mystical, unattainable figure. "I don't see him that way," he explains. Instead, Peter views Jesus as a mirror of human potential, believing we all possess the ability to heal, transcend time and space, and connect with the cosmic force that unites all life. His focus shifted away from dogma entirely. Now, Peter finds purpose in sharing his story, not to preach, but to help others recognize their own inner power and limitless potential. Peter Panagore sees his purpose in life as being a helper, a channel for the divine. "For me, living is about being as connected to the divine as possible and letting that flow take its own course," he explains. Whether it's easing someone's pain, sparking hope, or inspiring others, Peter feels his true calling is rooted in relieving suffering and spreading light. It's not a glamorous job, but for him, it's deeply fulfilling. Of course, life isn't all divine connections and moments of peace. Like everyone else, Peter faces life's messy realities: grief, betrayal, bad days, and yes, rude drivers. He recalls one recent moment when someone recklessly cut him off in traffic, narrowly avoiding a crash. "Yeah, I was shaken. I felt the anger, even tasted that metallic edge in my mouth. But I took a breath," Peter says. Instead of reacting with anger, he reminded himself, "I can't blame him for being human." He explains that one of the insights from his near-death experiences is understanding that everyone, no matter how they act, is just as flawed and broken as he is. But he doesn't stop there. "I see the light inside them," he says. "They can't really hurt me. I'm an eternal being." While it might sound a little out there, Peter's perspective fills him with a sense of curiosity, creativity, and joy. For him, life is about expressing the inexpressible, this divine light that he believes every person comes from and will ultimately return to. His approach? To navigate the chaos of being human while staying anchored to that eternal truth. It's not just a philosophy, it's a way of living. If you're wondering how these people managed to cheat death, there's actually a scientific explanation for it. Known as the Lazarus phenomenon, this rare condition occurs when patients who appear clinically dead unexpectedly come back to life. Named after the biblical story of Lazarus rising from the grave, this phenomenon is as mysterious as it is miraculous. While most patients ultimately do not survive, studies show that up to a third make a full recovery after experiencing this spontaneous revival. Interestingly, many experts believe the Lazarus phenomenon is underreported. Why? Legal concerns and fear of liability often deter medical professionals from disclosing these cases, making the phenomenon even more enigmatic than it already is. For centuries, humanity's fascination with death has been matched only by its fear of being declared dead too soon. In the 1800s, this anxiety grew into a widespread phobia known as taphophobia, or the fear of being buried alive. People were so terrified of premature burial that they went to extraordinary lengths to ensure they were truly dead before being interred. Some individuals included bizarre instructions in their wills. like having hot liquids poured on their skin or surgical incisions made to confirm death. For those still skeptical, safety measures were incorporated into burials. Crowbars and shovels were sometimes buried alongside coffins, and elaborate safety coffins were designed with breathing tubes, bells, flags, or even pyrotechnic devices to alert anyone above ground in case the deceased wasn't quite as deceased as they seemed. While modern medicine has significantly reduced these fears, the idea of being buried alive and the lengths people went to avoid it remains a chilling reminder of how fragile the line between life and death can be. Autoresuscitation, the medical phenomenon where patients spontaneously come back to life after appearing clinically dead, wasn't documented in scientific literature until 1982. A decade later, anesthesiologist Jack Bray Jr. named it the Lazarus phenomenon, drawing inspiration from the biblical story of Lazarus. Despite the term catching on, the phenomenon remains a rarity in medical studies and is still surrounded by mystery. Vedamurthy Adhiyaman, a consultant geriatrician in North Wales, became intrigued by the Lazarus phenomenon after witnessing it firsthand in the early 2000s. He and his team had been performing CPR on a man in his late 70s for about 15 minutes without success. At that point, the usual protocol would have been to stop and pronounce death, but Adhiyaman explained that there isn't a strict rule for how long CPR should be attempted. It's a case-by-case decision. Although Adhiyaman himself didn't declare the man dead, a team member informed the family that he had passed. What happened next made it clear the situation was far from over. About 15 to 20 minutes after CPR was stopped, the elderly man began breathing again, recalls Vedamurthy Adhiyaman. Despite this sudden return of vital signs, the man never regained consciousness and remained in a coma for 2 days before passing away on the third day. The man's family, convinced that CPR had been stopped too soon and that the care provided was inadequate, took Adhiyaman to court. It was during this legal battle that Adhiyaman began delving into the Lazarus phenomenon, aiming to show that such occurrences, though rare, were documented in medical history. After combing through existing literature, he identified 38 cases of the phenomenon, which proved crucial in demonstrating its legitimacy and clearing him of negligence. In 2007, Adhiyaman published a comprehensive review on the Lazarus phenomenon in the Journal of the Royal Society of Medicine. His analysis revealed that, on average, patients who auto-resuscitated did so about 7 minutes after CPR was discontinued. However, the process was not always closely monitored. In some cases, patients were left unattended, with one even being found alive in the hospital mortuary. While the majority of auto-resuscitated patients ultimately passed away, Adhiyaman found that 35% of them survived and were eventually discharged with no significant neurological damage. Interestingly, his research also indicated that positive outcomes were not strongly linked to how long CPR was performed, or how much time elapsed before auto-resuscitation occurred, adding to the intrigue and unpredictability of the phenomenon. In 2010, researchers at McGill University dug through decades of medical records and found only 32 documented cases of the Lazarus phenomenon since 1982. Around the same time, a German team uncovered 45 articles on the topic, many overlapping with the McGill findings. But the phenomenon hasn't disappeared. New cases continue to surface, and they're just as fascinating as they are unsettling. In 2012, a 65-year-old man in Malaysia was declared dead, only for his pulse to return 40 minutes later. A year after that, an 89-year-old woman in New Haven shocked everyone when her pulse came back 5 minutes after resuscitation had been stopped. And in 2015, 2 more cases hit the radar. A 67-year-old man in Denmark and, heartbreakingly, an 11-month-old girl in Rochester. Interestingly, some studies suggest that these stories might be just the tip of the iceberg. A 2003 study found that almost half of French emergency room physicians claimed that they'd witnessed at least one instance of auto-resuscitation during their careers. Similarly, a 2012 Canadian survey revealed that over 1/3 of critical care doctors had seen it happen. The takeaway? This eerie phenomenon might be happening more often than we think. It just doesn't always make it into the headlines. Doctors may shy away from officially reporting auto-resuscitation cases, because of the potential fallout, both professional and legal. Declaring someone dead prematurely can shake trust and lead to serious consequences, leaving many hesitant to admit when it happens. Adiyaman also points out that privacy laws add another layer of complication. Families often need to give consent for their loved one's case to be published, but getting that permission can be next to impossible when trust between the family and the medical team has already been broken. These barriers make studying autoresuscitation a challenge, leaving many of its underlying causes shrouded in mystery. However, one consistent factor stands out in all reported cases. The patient had received CPR. This connection has fueled theories about how CPR might contribute to the phenomenon. One leading idea involves something called dynamic hyperinflation, which can happen when the lungs are rapidly filled with air during CPR, but don't have enough time to fully exhale. This buildup of pressure in the lungs might restrict blood flow to the heart, or even stop the heart from pumping altogether, creating a temporary cardiac arrest. To explain it simply, when we breathe naturally, we create a suction effect that draws air into our lungs, generating negative pressure. But with CPR or a ventilator, air is forced into the lungs, creating positive pressure instead. As doctors explain, if someone's heart is already struggling, this added pressure can further reduce blood flow to the heart, impairing its function even more. This delicate balance may play a role in why some patients appear to come back to life after CPR stops and the pressure in their chest begins to normalize. It's a fascinating theory, but like much of the Lazarus phenomenon, it's still just that, a theory. The truth remains elusive, keeping this strange medical mystery alive. Still, the theory goes like this. When emergency doctors stop CPR, the lung pressure caused by dynamic hyperinflation normalizes, allowing blood to circulate more freely. This can trigger the autoresuscitation effect, essentially waking up a heart that had stopped beating. Another idea suggests that dynamic hyperinflation may slow down how quickly drugs administered during CPR reach the heart. Once CPR stops and blood flow stabilizes, the medications finally hit their target, potentially kickstarting circulation. There's also speculation about hyperkalemia, a condition where potassium levels in the blood become dangerously high. This imbalance disrupts heart function, but after doctors administer treatments like calcium, glucose, and insulin, or sodium bicarbonate to lower potassium levels, the heart may begin beating again. Despite these plausible explanations, the exact mechanics of the Lazarus phenomenon remain unclear. What is clear is that doctors can take steps to avoid declaring death too soon. Adiyaman suggests giving families a heads up when CPR is stopped and monitoring the patient closely for 10 to 15 minutes before making the final call. Death isn't a single moment. It's a process, Adiyaman explains. As organs gradually shut down, signs of life can linger or even reappear. He stresses that unless there's absolute certainty, physicians should avoid rushing to certify death. In a world where life can defy even the best medical expectations, a little patience might just make all the difference. In high-pressure situations, like those involving organ donation and transplantation, doctors don't always have the luxury of time to wait and watch. They're often forced to make quick, clear decisions about when life has definitively ended. This is where the dead donor rule comes into play, a crucial ethical standard stating that vital organs can only be taken from patients who are unquestionably dead, and that no living patient can be killed for the purpose of organ retrieval. Timing is everything in these cases. For organs to remain viable for transplant, they need to be removed as quickly as possible to avoid damage from a lack of blood flow. For patients who are brain dead, the process is straightforward. They're kept on a ventilator, which ensures continued circulation until the organs can be removed. But things get far trickier with cardiac death donors. In these situations, doctors face a delicate balancing act. They must wait long enough to be absolutely certain that the heart won't restart on its own, eliminating the possibility of something like the Lazarus phenomenon, while also acting quickly enough to ensure that the organs are still usable. It's a medical and ethical tightrope that underscores just how complex and high stakes this line between life and death can be. James Kirkpatrick, an associate professor of medicine and ethics expert, sums up the delicate balancing act doctors face in these situations. He explains that waiting too long after cardiac death increases the risk of organs deteriorating due to lack of blood supply. The longer you wait, the more likely the organs are to go bad, he says, so it cannot be too long. At the same time, Kirkpatrick emphasizes the importance of making sure the patient truly won't auto-resuscitate. Theoretically, their heart and lungs aren't irreversibly damaged and could come back, he points out. This creates an undeniable tension. Acting too soon risks premature declaration of death, but waiting too long jeopardizes the very organs that could save another life. Currently, there's no universal agreement on how long doctors should wait after cardiac death before beginning organ donation procedures. The recommended wait times vary depending on the organization. For example, the Institute of Medicine advises waiting at least 5 minutes, while the American Society of Transplant Surgeons and the Society for Critical Care Medicine suggest just 2 minutes. A 2012 study examined this issue by monitoring 73 potential organ donors after cardiac death. The results showed no cases of auto-resuscitation after 2 minutes. But there's a key detail. None of those patients had undergone CPR. This distinction matters because CPR appears to play a significant role in the Lazarus phenomenon. Without it, the likelihood of auto-resuscitation might be lower. But the phenomenon remains unpredictable. These inconsistencies highlight the challenges faced by doctors in striking the right balance between waiting long enough to confirm death and acting quickly enough to ensure organ viability. Adopting national guidelines for managing auto-resuscitation cases is easier said than done, partly because skepticism still lingers within the medical community. As Doherty puts it, frankly, some people don't really believe in it. A handful of cases, no matter how compelling, aren't enough to sway everyone or overhaul how physicians determine death. It's an uphill battle to establish consensus on an issue that still feels more like an anomaly than a medical certainty. Adding to the challenge are advancements in life-sustaining technologies and resuscitation techniques, which have made the line between life and death blurrier than ever. These innovations prompt even tougher questions. How do we define the point at which death is truly irreversible? And with medical breakthroughs pushing the boundaries of survival, is it possible that what we consider death today could evolve in the future? Despite its rarity and the limited understanding around it, Doherty emphasizes the importance of caution when declaring someone dead. A lot of care needs to be taken, he explains, adding that the Lazarus phenomenon, while uncommon, is still definitely a cause for concern. Even if the phenomenon is rare, the stakes are incredibly high. Misjudging the moment of death isn't just a medical mistake. It can have profound ethical, emotional, and even legal repercussions. For now, the mystery of auto-resuscitation remains, serving as a humbling reminder of how much we still have to learn about the human body and the boundaries of life and death. Do stories like Gary Busey's make you rethink what it really means to be gone? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button for more.